So we're in the middle of Siman Daled, Siman Test of Iggeres HaKodesh, and on page Kuf Yud Daled, opposite of page 226.
Kuf Yud Daled?
Yeah.
Where?
When we start inside, I'll give you the exact line. So, last week, we spoke, you remember what we spoke last week, right? Still bothered by it, or?
Yeah, I don't understand how we could say that.
Al Kapanim, we're going to move further this week. It's a new idea that Alter Rebbe is going to introduce this week. But last week we spoke about this idea, the larger idea that emerged. I know you got stuck on a detail, but the larger idea is that for a Yid, you go to work, and the purpose of going to work is to emulate Hashem, to be medame hatsura liyetzra, and to be able to give tzedakah. So we work in order to be able to give tzedakah. So who do we give tzedakah to? So here, according to Torah, there's a pecking order. There's an order of priorities. So Isha Ibanav Koidman Lakoil, first comes family and then comes other people. But it's not so much about, as we said last week, it's not so much about how much tzedakah you give, although obviously the perspective that you have on your work and on your money and on your tzedakah certainly impacts how much you're going to give. It's a certain attitude. The money that I have is made for tzedakah, and I give it all away. Only thing is that some of it I have to keep for myself. Some of it I have to give to my family. That's part of what the Eibishter wants of me, but it's all part of my Avodas Hashem. That was what we spoke about last week.
How about Din Pruta Kedin Me'ah? If I give penny, if I give $100, for Hashem is the same thing.
Din Pruta Kedin Me'ah doesn't mean that. Din Pruta Kedin Me'ah means that if a judge gets a case, and there's two cases. One case is $100. One case is $1. The judge has to deal with both cases with the same level of seriousness, right? As opposed to saying, "Oh, it's $1. Who cares?" So,
that's right.
That sounds good.
Now the Alter Rebbe is going to say, to move on to a point which is a different point, perhaps related. Maybe we'll talk about it a little later. That tzedakah, not only is tzedakah important, but actually in our generation, tzedakah is the most important mitzvah that there is, as opposed to in previous generations. The Alter Rebbe is going to base this on an idea, the idea of what's called Yuridas Haderes. But before we get there, we know that on Sukkot we say Harachman Hu Yakim Lanu as Sukkot David Hanefelas. Right? What does Sukkot David Hanefelas mean? Translate it.
It's the sukkah that fell down.
The Sukkah of David that fell down, that collapsed. Everyone agrees with that translation over here?
It's the literal translation.
No, it's not the literal translation. It's not. The Baruch Hashem we have over here in our class, we have an Israeli. So we can always turn to him and ask. Let me ask you.
You translate.
Sasan.
In the Hove.
Oh, so what does it mean? Sukkah David. So what does Sukkah David Hanefelas mean?
Constantly,
There we go. The Sukkah of David that's falling. See? We read something our whole life, and then suddenly we have to stop and think. No, Sukkah of David Hanefelas doesn't mean the Sukkah of David that fell, but Sukkah of David Hanefelas means the Sukkah of David that's falling. What does that mean, the Sukkah of David that's falling? What is the Sukkah of David? So Alter Rebbe is going to explain that Sukkah David Hanefelas is the idea of Yuridas Haderes. Let's first talk for a moment about Yuridas Haderes, and then we'll explain how it relates to Sukkah David Hanefelas.
What is Sukkah David Hanefelas? That refers to Beis Hamikdash, or what does it refer?
And Pashup Pshat refers to Beis Hamikdash, but as we know, there's always the Pashup Pshat, and we know by now you should know there's always the deeper idea which is behind it. So one of the biggest differences between Yiddishkeit and between secular culture is the idea that we believe in Yuridas Haderes. The Goyim, they believe in evolution. What does evolution mean? Evolution means that a product evolves, and as it evolves, it becomes
Something else.
something, but not something else. It becomes something more sophisticated. It becomes something better. It adapts to the time. If it becomes worse, then that's called actually devolution. I don't know if you ever heard that word. Devolution is the opposite of evolution. When something devolves, that means it's devolving from a greater, more sophisticated state to a lower state. Evolution, actually, when you talk about evolution, we're talking about the world reaching a better place. There's a famous story, they say. I'm sure that some of you, if not all of you, have heard it. I've heard it said about Rabbi Feinstein. I've heard it said about Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, that he was once on a plane, and he's once on a plane together with his grandson.
Who's this?
Again, I've heard the story said about Rabbi Feinstein. I've heard it said about Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. He's saying you heard it also said about Rabbi Twersky. Okay, it doesn't really make a difference who it happened to, and it doesn't make a difference whether it happened, because the point remains. And next then there's an old guy on the plane, and after a few hours into the flight, the old guy turns to him and says, "I don't understand. I'm looking at your relationship with your grandchild, and the incredible respect and reverence that he has for you. And I have grandchildren, and they all think that I am a has-been, and that I'm a relic, an ancient relic of the past, and they think I'm primitive. They think they know better than me, and they're more enlightened than me,
No respect.
and more knowledgeable than me. How did you manage to get such respect from your grandchild?" And the rabbi said, it's very simple. He says, your grandchild looks at you and says, "Hey, take a look at that. That guy, he's 2 generations closer to the apes.
Evolution.
So why should I respect him?" My grandchild looks at me and says, "He's 2 generations closer to Matan Torah." So there's this idea that the closer we are, the closer the Yidden were to Matan Torah, the more respect they were closer to the source. In fact, we know that in the Aseres HaDibros there are two luchos. There were 2 luchos divided into 2. And on one side you have all the dibros that are bin Adam lamakim, and on the other side there's all the dibros that are bin Adam lachavere. However, as the famous question is, there's famously one exception, which is that Kabi the Savicha Vasimecha is on the luach, is on the tablet, which contains the mitzvahs which are bin Adam lamakim, mitzvahs between a person and Hashem. So why does it belong there? And many answers have been suggested. One of the answers that was given, if I remember correctly, was the chinuch, but I might be wrong on that. One of the answers is that if we don't respect our parents, then ultimately we don't respect Hashem either. Because where does our respect for Hashem come from? Where does our Messiah come from? The whole Yiddishkeit is based on Messiah. So ultimately, our obligation to respect our parents is a religious obligation. It's not only my father and my mother are my connection to Hashem. They're the ones who told me about Har Sinai. They're the ones who told me about Matan Torah, because their parents told it to them before them, and their parents told them before them. So therefore, Kibbud Av V'Em is actually a Ben Adam is also contains a strong element of Ben Adam Lamakim. And this is reflected also in halacha. There was always this understanding that a previous generation is greater than the later generation, or a previous era is greater than a later era. So therefore, the Chachmei Gemara, they will not argue on the Chacham of the Mishnah, even though theoretically, technically, they are able to. If you look at Pi Halacha, that if you have a Bez and a Sanhedrin that rises a later Sanhedrin, they have every right to overturn the decisions made by a previous Bez. Okay, there are rules exactly how and when, but that is Beferish is and the Chachmei Gemara had the din of a Sanhedrin. If you look at the Rambam talks about it, and in the Zakdamet to Perish Mishnayis, and in the Zakdamet to the Yad HaChazaka. But there was this respect, the respect that they had. And the same thing is, the Goinim won't argue on the Gemara, and the Achreinim won't argue on the Rishonim. An Achron won't argue on the Rishonim. If all the Rishonim, there's a consensus amongst the Rishonim, no Achron is going to argue. Now if there's Machlekes are Rishonim, then okay, then Achron can choose which side to paskin according to. But where there's a consensus amongst the Rishonim, no Achron is going to argue. Why not? Why not? Because I was born 300 years later, so therefore... So there's this idea of Yuri Saderis. Number one, understanding that they were closer to Har Sinai. I remember, when was it when Trump was impeached? I think this a year ago, 2 years ago, something around that sort. So I was reading an article about it, and someone said over there, they were quoting a lawyer who was making an argument based on, there was an impeachment back in the 1860s. Andrew Johnson was impeached. And the lawyer was saying that we have to listen to what the lawyers were saying back then because they were so much closer to the framers of the Constitution. They had a better understanding of what the founding fathers meant in the Constitution than we do today, because we're another 150 years removed from there. And I was thinking that's interesting, the parallel, now mashal to the Torah. At the end of the day, there's that understanding, the closer you are to Matan Torah, the closer you are to the Messiah. So therefore there's the standard, which is in every single era has the respect for the era before him.
Rabbi, Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, they were different generation, right?
No, they're the same generation.
Oh, so
And in fact, within the same generation, there's the halacha that we say halacha kibasroi. There we say that but that's a different idea. If I live in the same generation or in the same era, more or less in the same era, so we go according to the later one. And the reason for that is because we say the later one was more or less on the same level as the earlier one because they're in the same era, and he knew what the earlier one said, and he still paskin otherwise. So we paskin. There's the idea of halacha kibasroi. Go within the era, the same era. That's where there can be machloek. Yeah, Rashi and Tam, they're both in the era of Rishonim. Now, an era can last for a few hundred years also. But it's not only that they're closer to Matan Torah, there's also this understanding that the neshamas of the previous generation were higher neshamas than our neshamas. And that every generation, the neshamas progressively are becoming lower neshamas. What does it mean, a lower neshama? A lower neshama, what?
We discounted?
Are we discounted? A lower neshama means the neshama is less spiritually sensitive than the neshamas beforehand. You know that we talk about neshamas of Atzilus and neshamas of Bria, neshamas of Yitzira, neshamas of Asiya. That means neshamas that go through the process, and our neshamas are from the lowest level of Malchus, the Malchus of Asiya. Which is why our capacity to understand and our capacity to feel is nowhere near. We talk about the Rishonim kamalachim, the Rishonim that they were taka compared to us, they were like malachim. They pashat had higher neshamas, which is one of the reasons why our generation is called Iggeres de Mashiach. Why are we called Iggeres de Mashiach? So, on a simple level, the reason why we're called Iggeres de Mashiach is because we're right before Mashiach is coming, to the extent that we actually hear, if you listen closely, we can hear the sound of Mashiach's footsteps as he's running in our direction. Unfortunately, it seems he's not running fast enough. But talk upon him. That's why we're called Iggeres de Mashiach. But there's another shot why we're called Iggeres de Mashiach, which is that because we're on the level of Akiv, we're on the level of the heel. So yeah, we're the bottom of the heap. We're the heels, and the heels is not only the lowest part of the body. In fact, there's a medrash, I believe it's a Avos the Rabbi Naftali, which says that the heel is the Malach HaMavis Sheba Adam. The Medrash says that every single thing in the world, we know Gamas or Olam, not some believe. The human being is a composite of everything. We are a microcosm of the world. And the Medrash goes on to show different parts of the person, where different elements of the world, where they are to be found in the person. And the Medrash says, where do we find the Malach HaMavis? The Malach HaMavis is in the heel, because the heel is almost dead. There's so little life in it, that it's almost dead. And that's why, if you have there's a hot mikveh, a very hot mikveh, you want to see if you can go into it, you're not going to stick your nose into it, you're not even going to stick your finger into it.
Stick your foot.
You're going to stick your heel. You'll stick, not your toe.
No.
You'll stick your heel in, right? Because it's that's how unsensitive your heel is. That even if it's very, very hot, you'll feel it a drop, and then you know that you have to wait.
It's callous, that's cool.
Okay? We're calloused also. Our generation is calloused, and our generation, the neshamas, are on the madrega of Akiv. And this is, again, the larger concept of Iggeres de Mashiach. As the generations proceed, we become lower and lower. Interestingly, since we're learning Tanya, Iggeres mentioning, we know that the Alter Rebbe is known universally as the Rav. And the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe is known as Shulchan Aruch Rav. Why is it called Rav? Because already during the Alter Rebbe's lifetime, he was already known to be so great. The Gemara says there were a few crossovers, a few people who, even though they were in the generation of the Amayroim, they were as great as the Tanoim. One of them was Rav. But Rav, we say Rav, Tana, Upalig. The Rav, even though he was in the first generation of Amayroim, but still he was on the level of a Tana. And the Alter Rebbe was universally recognized as a Tana Upali. That's how great the Alter Rebbe was, which is why he was given the distinction, the title of Rav, which is why the Shulchan Aruch is known by many as Shulchan Aruch Rav, right? But that's an anomaly. And yes, there are, by the way, sometimes where we have anomalies. You'll have a person in a generation who doesn't belong there, a person from an entirely Ganzen, but generally speaking, a generation is a generation. And you have to understand that within every generation, you also have a koima shlema.
What?
A koima shlema, a complete, in other words, in Iggeres the Mashiach today, there's a head. The Reish B'nai Yisrael is the head of our generation. Within the heel, there's the heart of the heel, there's the heel of the heel, there's the head of the heel, there's the hand of the heel. And because this is one of the ideas in Kabbalah, just like in DNA, like in every single cell of your body, you have the whole thing, right? So in the cell in your hand, you also have the head. The same thing is also, everything is everywhere. This is a rule, you find it in many, many places in Kabbalah and Chassidus, how we find elements of everything and everywhere. Sorry? Microcosm, right. So in every single generation, there's also, in our generation, there are some people who are more action people, they're the feet people. Some people are more heart people, emotional people. Some people are more cup mentioned, they're more head people. But all of us are on the level of heel. And just to give you context, so in the previous generation, let's say people were on the madriga of the heart. So the heart also, there was the heel of the heart, there was the heart of the heart, the head of the heart. The head of the heel is lower than the heel of the heart. Because ultimately, even the head of the heel is still the heel, which is the head of the heel. It's part of the heel, right? And the heel of the heart is more sensitive, spiritually sensitive, right, than the, yeah. No. So anyone over here is wondering and thinking, Lama asa Hashem kacha? Why did Hashem do it this way? Why did I have to be a part of this this lowly generation? What did I do wrong to merit to be in this generation? Suddenly you might be feeling bad. What's the purpose of this? So Alter Rebbe is going to explain, and we're doing a lot outside, we'll do this afterwards inside.
Yeah, it makes it easy.
Good. People from the heel generation, they need it to be easier.
More explanation.
Yeah. Alter Rebbe explains.
Maybe the reason is because we are Gilgulim. Really, our neshamas came from a previous generation, which was on a higher level.
And therefore?
I forgot exactly what you asked, but
Okay.
I want to know why.
You're explaining that even if that were to be correct, that explains how, not the why. Why is there this generation? Why did Hashem want there to be a generation with all these lowly people?
No, because you have to make, it's part of the tikkun. You have to masakin a chesarna, but
I hear.
So that there's a purpose of it.
Better, wouldn't it? That would make us better then. If every generation that's a Gilgul is a tikkun from what came
From a
before,
previous
it means that they're better. They're getting better.
So what do you say?
This really is not the kind of question that's open to theories, you know. Like, it's not as if I'm smart enough, I'll figure it out. You have to have a. No, it's like, I can't. It's not my theory either. And this theory is. There's a reason why. I'll get to you in a second. There's a reason why Kabbalah is called Kabbalah. And Kabbalah means it's something that we have to receive, because in these inyanim, the neshama inyanim, we can guess from today till tomorrow. Others is emes, others is nish. Is it true or is it not? The only way we know if it's true is if we heard this from the tzaddikim, from the Kabbalah, we spoke with HaKodesh, with the Nevuah. Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that if somebody's a Gilgul of another neshama, that there's a Yerida.
That's also true. Also correct.
So if that's the case, if I'm a Gilgul of some high neshama, why shouldn't I be on that level or very close to that level as opposed to being in the heel?
All correct. Alter Rebbe is going to explain as follows.
That's his question.
That's what I'm.
You repeated his question.
Can I add up something?
Now you read it.
Okay, yes.
Why this generation is the Icaruca de Mashiach? Every generation that will be in this Icaruca de Mashiach will ask the same question, why me? So we're the lucky one that we're here.
No, my question isn't why we're the generation that's right before Mashiach. My question is, why would Hashem make this system where every generation becomes progressively lower? What's the point in that?
What's the wisdom behind it?
Yeah.
What's the wisdom of the architecture?
Oh, you know all the wisdom of HaKodesh Baruch Hu? He
that's
decided
exactly.
to do it.
That's what we're learning over here.
That's what we're learning.
That's what Torah is all about.
Why does Yuri this in the show? With Yuri this in Doris? What's the architecture? What's the wisdom behind it? It's called the Niskatan Adoris. It's another common.
The Nakuda of the answer is, is that every single generation is 100% fully equipped to do the avodah of that generation. And every single generation has a different avodah. It's not as if we're in Galus for 2,000 years, and ever since day one, we're just trying to accomplish the same thing. No. Every generation has a different job. And the level of the neshama corresponds to the type of job that they're meant to do.
But that's every individual also, isn't it?
That is correct. That is true about every, and we learned about that in Siman Zayin. Remember, Manoim Gerleinu. But there's also and it also mentions here the idea of generational differences. And the reason why is because Sukas David Hanefelas. Sukas David is a reference to the Shekhinah. David represents the idea of Malchus. And as we know, for those of you who have been in the class, you know that the Malchus and Shekhinah is the same thing. The Shekhinah is Malchus Datzilus. And the Shekhinah is in a constant state of falling. The Shekhinah, the oil of the Shekhinah is falling through the worlds, from Atzilus to Bria to Yetzirah to Asiya. And the reason why is because our job here in Galus is to elevate everything. And therefore, every level where the Shekhinah is at, we tap into it on that level. By way of example, let's say you have a room and it's dark in the room. So you want it to become very bright in the room. So what do? So you open up a window. But on which side are you going to open up a window? You have windows all around. In the morning, you'll open it up in the east, right?
Side, west side, in the afternoon.
During afternoon hours, maybe you'll open up a sunroof, a sunlight. And by the evening, you'll open up on the west. And why is that? Because you're opening the window to the direction where the sunlight is shining. Wherever the Shekhinah is, the Sukas David Hanefelas, the Shekhinah which is falling, the Yeridas Adeiros corresponds to the Sukas David Hanefelas, the Shekhinah that's falling. Wherever the Shekhinah is, if we want to bring the Shekhinah into our life, we have to open up a window into that area, in that direction. So, for example, in the early years of Galus, where was the Shekhinah? The Shekhinah went down one level from Atzilus, where it is, and it went down into the world of Bria. What is the world of Bria? The world of Bria is the world, as we know, of Bina, the world of Seichel. So what was the way then of bringing the Shekhinah into the world? Was through learning. And therefore, back in the day, in the times of the Tanoim, times of the Mairoim, the Iker was Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah was the main avodah of the time. Davening and even mitzvahs Maisiyas played second fiddle, because at that point, if you want to access the Shekhinah, you have to open up the window to where the Shekhinah is. At that point, it was in the mind. At a certain point in time, the Shekhinah entered the world, went Nefelas, it fell further. It fell to the world of Yetzirah. In the world of Yetzirah, what is the world of Yetzirah? The world of Yetzirah is the world of emotions, the world of Midas. So when that happened, the primary way of bringing a likus, godliness, into this world was through davening, avodah shebelev. And that was the main avodah of the time. And then in Iggeres the Mashiach, the Shekhinah falls into the world of Asiya, and the way to access the Shekhinah, and the way to bring the Shekhinah into the world, the most primary way, is through Asiya, is through action, which is primarily the mitzvah of tzedakah. So why do we have Yeridas Adeiros? Because we didn't have Yeridas Adeiros, we'd be confused. What's our main avodah? We are given the tools and the powers that we need for our generation to do our avodah. And in our generation, because the Ikar avodah is avodas hatzedakah, so therefore we don't need to have the mental and emotional capabilities and capacities which the previous generations had, because we have a different avodah than what they have. Our avodah right now is the avodah of Asiya. And here, this is Dr. Rebbe is telling us Chassidim, you should know. You guys are great Chassidim. I know you guys daven at length, and you learn Torah. I want you to know, however, that the main avodah of our generation is the avodah of tzedakah. Why? That is the idea of Yeridas Adeiros. Let's do this inside. Page Kuf Yudalit. Opposite of page 226. Halfway down from the top, the last words in the line, Al Kain, right after the period.
That's it. Iron cross.
Yeah. Al Kain, therefore, Ahuvai Achai, my beloved ones, my brothers, Simun alavavchem le'ela hadvarim, please take heart and pay heed to these words, Hanemarim biksarim yoid, these words which I am saying over here, very briefly. Hashem, panim al panim adaber bam ba'arucha, face to face. I plan on addressing and speaking to you about this at length. You should know the primary avodas Hashem during these times, be'ikves Mashiach, right before Mashiach comes, in the heel of Mashiach, he avodas tzedakah. Is the avodah of tzedakah. K'meisha Amr Razal, as Chazal tell us, Ein Yisrael Negal and Ela b'tzedakah. That Geula will only come through tzedakah, which indicates very strongly that tzedakah is the avodah, which is the right before Mashiach comes. It's the avodah that will bring Mashiach. When Chazal tell us that Talmud Torah is on par with Gemilas Chasadim, as we know, it says, you say every single morning, say a bunch of different types of Gemilas Chasadim, and what do we end off? At the end we say, V'Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, but that only applied b'Yimeim. That was in the times of Chazal. She'Talmud Torah ye'ikar aveda etzlam, that by them the ikar aveda was Talmud Torah. Valkein hayu chachamim gedolim, and that's why they were great chachamim, tanaim v'amiroim. Mashen kein be'ikves Mashiach, as opposed to in our generation, right before Mashiach comes, Shenofla Sukkahs David, that the Sukkah of David has fallen ad bechines raglayim v'akvayim, it fell down all the way to the feet, to the heels. She bechines Asiyah, it's the level of Asiyah, the world of Asiyah. Eina derech ledafka ba'emes, there's no way to truly cleave to Hashem. Ulahapcha chasheichel and ahira dilan, to transform the darkness to light. Ki'im bebechines Asiyah, only through action. And by the way, you going back to that example of the room with the windows. So if it's the morning comes and I open up the window not on the east, I open it up on the west, what's going to happen?
Still be dark.
No, it won't be dark. Try it in your house.
In the morning,
yeah, it'll get light in the room when the sun is out again, even if you open up, but not as much, right? And the nimshal is also, and if I learn Torah today, I'm not bringing Torah into the world, and if I'm doing mitzvah, if I learn daven, but the ikar to open up the window mamish directly to the shechina and to mamish to bring in that main intense light, that is through the window which is directed at the asiyah, which is through our actions. Shehi Misa tzedakah, which is dafke tzedakah, ki yadu ala maskilim, as is known to the maskilim, to those who understand. No, you're not a maskil.
This was before the Haskalah.
Sorry.
This was before the Haskalah.
Doesn't mean this was cool.
So the Alter Rebbe is going to give is going to say something coming up, give a reason, but I think there's also another nekuda over here. As you're implying, there are many mitzvahs that we do with Misa. But of all the mitzvahs that we do with Misa, which one is the absolute Misa? Is tzedakah. Right, you're talking about Perek Lamed Zayin, but there's I want to bring out a different, because that means there's more koyach that goes into it. So when you put on tefillin in the morning, someone's going to call, a goy looks at you, he thinks you're nuts. But if you go and you go on the street and you give someone $2, a poor person, the guy doesn't look at you like you're crazy. What's the difference? When you're putting on tefillin in the morning, you're doing an action, yeah, but it's a spiritual action. When you're shaking a lulav, it's a spiritual action. And that's why it's so connected to kavanah, these mitzvahs. And you sit and you look and you find out what is the kavanah in tefillin, what is the kavanah in eating matzah, what is the kavanah in the mezuzah. Yes, they're actions, but it's almost as if the physicality of the action is subsumed in the spirituality of the action. And that's why the guy looks at you and thinks you're nuts, because it's not really an action of this world. It's really an action of another world. You're doing something symbolic over here which symbolizes stuff in the spiritual worlds. So yes, it's Misa, but it's a spiritual Misa. Tzedakah is a Misa, but what is the kavanah when you give tzedakah? No one cares. No one cares. It's not what tzedakah is about. We've spoken about this many times. Right? Ma'abid selah, and someone who loses money, and oni finds it, a poor person finds it, and feeds his family. The mitzvah tzedakah is there.
The one who lost it gets the mitzvah.
Yeah, even though the one who lost it goes home and cries that he lost money, he's very upset about it, because the kavanah is not important. Tzedakah is about an action in this world of going and making sure that someone has some food, making sure that someone has shelter, making sure that someone has clothing. It's a very physical act. There's very little spiritual symbolism in it. And even the spiritual symbolism that there is bottled to the physical act. The main thing is the physical act. Yeah, we're learning Tanya, we're learning a lot of different kavanas in tzedakah, but at the end of the day, tzedakah is not about a kavanah. Tzedakah is about that the poor person should have food. And at the end of the day, all other mitzvahs, even the other mitzvahs that are connected with Misa, they're about spirituality. They're about some sort of reflections of realities that are going on in higher worlds. That's on a very simple level how tzedakah is the most asiya of any other mitzvah.
This is why the reward.
Also, though, that if you give tzedakah to somebody who's not hagun l'kach, you don't get the full benefit of the mitzvah. So. Why should you get benefit if you lose money and a poor man gets it? You have no kavanah there.
Because tzedakah is not about the kavanah.
Yeah, but if you give it to somebody with kavanah who's not
right,
worthy of it,
yeah,
then you don't get the full benefit.
The mitzvah. You're proving my point. Because it's not about the kavanah, it's about the action. Did a poor person get to feed his or her family? That's what matters. If that's the mitzvah tzedakah. It's about the asiyah.
What's the difference when I go to tzedakah and I eat?
Sorry?
What's different when I go to it and I eat then?
The difference is that this is a mitzvah and that's not it's a mitzvah, but it's a different gathering ganzen.
This is why the reward for tzedakah is the highest that's in Mimavet.
I don't know if that's the reason why, but we know that tzedakah has the reward of Tatzal Mamavis. I'm not sure what the connection is, but yeah.
It's going to give to a guy who's a poor person.
Sorry?
It's not a mitzvah to give to a poor
I didn't say that. No. He's saying
it's different when I go to tzedakah and I eat.
Is there a mitzvah for a goy to give tzedakah? Was the question. But the Rebbe then is going to add another nekuda. Kiyadu ala maskilim. 4 lines on the bottom. As is known to those who know, to those who understand. Shebechinas asiya belukus. That the idea of asiya, lukus. We're trying to bring down the oyer into our world, all the way into our world. Ki bechinas hashpos fam shochas hachayis lamata mata lamanda leste migrame klum. And all the higher is bringing down all the hamshacha and the hashpos of the energy of Hashem way down to that which has nothing of its own. The higher worlds, they have some sort of attraction. They have qualities. So therefore, when you bring down the Shechina into the higher world, we don't say it's Leman de Lesle Migarme Klum. We don't say it's someone that the higher worlds have nothing of their own and they're unworthy of Gili Elokus. Where is there this unworthiness of Gili Elokus? It's an Olam Asiyah. There's nothing here. Giving tzedakah is not only Asiyah, it's not only action, but it's also we're benefiting a person who is undeserving of our kindness. Because that's what tzedakah is all about. And this also causes the bringing down of the Shekhinah into the lowest world, the world of Asiyah, which is what we're trying to do in Ikvus of the Mashiach, bring Alakus into the lowest world. And that is through the mitzvah of tzedakah. What does it mean last minute claim? Sorry?
What does it mean last minute claim that?
It has not, just like the oni, the poor person has nothing of its own. The same thing is also the world of Asiyah also has nothing of its own. So the giving tzedakah mirrors this idea of bringing down malakus into the lowest levels of ikvasa the ikvasa. And anyone who sacrifices the Yitzhahara in this area of Pesach Yadu Lavavi and opens up his hand, opens up his heart, iskafiyas sita achra, suppresses the sita achra, umahapech hasheichel and and transforms the darkness to light. I'm sorry, mahapech hasheichel ha'oira Hashem yizbarach, and transforms the darkness into the light of Hashem, hasheichen aleinu bebechinas asiyah, who resides then upon us in the world of Asiyah, be'ikvis Mashiach, on the lowest, these lowest times of ikvis Mashiach, ve'yiska lires ayin be'ayin, and will be zeichet to see eye to eye, b'shuv Hashem tzion, v'chulu, when Hashem returns to tzion.
What does it mean by eye to eye? Which eye?
Our eye will see Hashem's eye.
That's about Mashiach stuff.
Yeah.
It'd be his galus of the first.
Yeah. So this is a huge chiddush. It's a huge chiddush. The Alter Rebbe is saying that in our generation, the Ikar Avodah is the Avodah of Tzedakah. And
That applies to
it's very different than saying, Tzedakah Taslum Emavas, or saying some, Gdelo Tzedakah Shemekar Rebbe Sago'ula, or somehow other, extolling the greatness of tzedakah. We have Talmud Torah Keneged Kulan. We have Shabbos, the Shakul Keneged, it's Keneged Kol HaTorah, and the mitzvahs of tzitzis we had, right? A lot of mitzvahs which Chazal say amazing things about. But Alter Rebbe is making a very unqualified statement that in our generation, the Ikar Avodah is tzedakah. Ikar Avodah is tzedakah.
What does that for the first shtickle? I don't know what's Pesach.
Right. So he said it's really a separate nekuda, but obviously it has to have some sort of connection. And I think the Alter Rebbe is saying when you go to work and you're going to work in order to give tzedakah, which is really what Alter Rebbe is telling us in the first part of the letter. They're going to work and it's not, don't think that it's time, you're going to work to do another mitzvah. Actually, you're going to work every day is to enable to you to do the Ikar Avodah of what our generation is for. And this is a very important message, especially for Baalei Asakim, especially for people who are business people. I have a friend, I go to the same shul as him, and I farbring with him usually on Shabbos. We sit by the Kiddush together, we farbring, we have a group of friends. This is one friend. Remember this 2-3 years ago, he tells me, Rabbi, he says, to be honest, I have nothing pushing me really in work anymore. Baruch Hashem, financially, I'm quite comfortable. So I'll make another few dollars. I'm missing I don't have any more that, the drive. So I told him, that's your Avodas Hashem. Your Avodas Hashem is to go to work and to make a lot of money and to give a lot of tzedakah. And you have to absolutely have that drive, and you have to put yourself fully into it and realize that is your Avodah. Most people who are business people, these people I've encountered, they've managed to make this divide, to divide their lives. There's the work, and that. Why do I work? To make money. Yeah, of course I give tzedakah, but I don't go to work to give tzedakah. I go to work to make money. I make a lot of money, and then I have to give tzedakah because I'm a Yid. I'm from Yid, so I give Misa, I give Choimish, I have a Yidin Arachmanim by Shanim Gimli Chasadim. But I work for myself. Now, what do I do if I want to serve Hashem? If I want to serve Hashem, for that I need to learn some more Gemara. I need to learn some more Chassidus. I need to daven a little longer. And obviously that's all correct, because even the Baal Isaac has been, just like the heel also has to have a heart, and the heel also has to have a mind. The heel also has to learn Torah, and the heel also has to daven. But there's that divide. My work is about me. Avodas Hashem is about my office, is about me and about Elam Hazeh. And when I go to shul, that's when I start serving the Eibishter. And that's a totally wrong perspective. Your office is just as much your Avodas Hashem, and even more so. As the Alter Rebbe says over here, in our generation, that's the Ikar Avodas Hashem, is to give tzedakah. How are you going to make tzedakah? By going to work. You have to wake up in the morning and say, Hashem wants me to go to work to make a lot of money to give tzedakah. And that's your Avodas Hashem just as much as your davening is your Avodas Hashem.
That's why isn't that emphasis, the yeshivas don't emphasize that. That's what you're saying. I've never heard it from
I go to Kasha. But you realize also,
from you, nobody else.
And you realize this what Alter Rebbe says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. What are you saying when you say Shema? We learned this last week. Hashem Echad. Everything is Elokus. You open up your eyes, boom, it's all gone. You go to work, that's not Hashem. How is that possible? Your work is also your Avodas Hashem. I turn to this Chaverman. I say, are you going to become a rabbi? A big Talmud Chacham? He's like, no. I'm like, you're right, you're not. I said, you're right, you're not. I know him. It's not. So what's your job in this world? Your job is why did the Eibishter put you in this world? Why? It's because your job is Avodas HaTzedakah. We a few weeks ago we said the story about remember the Neshama Satoyis, the wandering souls, and the rich person and the rich person who was helping pull the horse out of the mud, and the poor person inviting the people. The understanding that Hashem gave everyone the koiches they need to do their mission. Okay, so for example, if you have a Rosh Yeshiva who decides that I need to give a lot of tzedakah, so he drops his day job and he goes and he gets a job in a management position, makes money. Obviously, that's not his mission. But for most people in our generation, and again, for most people in the generation, their job is Zvulun, not Yisachar. Yisachar is a mute. Zvulun is the most. And the Zvulun has to realize that his Avodas Hashem is going to work, making money and giving tzedakah. It's not, there's the work that I do, and then at the end of the day, after a whole day of spending it doing stam, shagasan, and shtusim to support my family, now, finally I get to go to shul, and I'll learn my daf yomi, and I'm going to start serving the Eibishter. No! That's just as much serving the Eibishter. But it's all about your perspective. It's about the perspective of when you go to work and not fooling yourself. You wake up in the morning, Eibishter, what do you want me to do today? You want me to go to work today because you made me a fool and you made me a balesek. That's the kashreinus you gave me. That's the talent you gave me. You made me an okev. You made me a heel. You didn't make me a head. If you made me a head, I'd have become a Rosh Yeshiva. You made me a heel, and that means I'm supposed to make money and give tzedakah. That's what I'm doing. It's a whole different perspective on life. And a different perspective on our work, understanding it's all about tzedakah, and don't feel bad about it. Because understand that actually your avoid and giving tzedakah is the ikar avoid of our days, more so than the Rosh Yeshiva.
Yeah, but what is
when the Alter Rebbe wrote this, was a few generations before us. He said his generation maybe it's good for this thing.
The problem with what you're saying is the Alter Rebbe says that this is because of Yuridas Haderis and Tzukas Dav Nefelas. So if anything happened in the last 200 years, we're even lower. So our Avodah is even more tzedakah. In other words, it's not going back up. It's Hanefelas until Mashiach comes. When we have the Yakim Lanu, so it's more Misa and more Asiyah.
A lot of them say they complain. They say we're getting involved with too much work. They say it's a klola, not a bracha. They say you should be mamayit in
mamayit be'esek v'asoik b'Torah.
That's the hashkafa shmek. You understand what I'm talking about?
And as I said before, and I said when the person says that he has to learn more Torah, I said he wasn't wrong. A Baal Esek has to learn more Torah and has to always add a learning Torah and mitzvahs. But no. The idea that that's Avodas Hashem and that's not.
I don't understand.
That's actually, I'm going to say radical words. It smells of kfirah to an extent, not kfirah as in the opposite of Achdus Hashem. The idea that Avodas Hashem encompasses every part of my life. And when I go to work, it's part of my Avodas Hashem. Remember the story that I said last week about every večer is a seder. Every supper is a seder. What do you mean? This is a seder. This is a supper. But if you're Eivid Hashem tonight, Eibishter, what do you want me to have? Tonight you want me to have a polka and some rice? Great. Okay, tomorrow night's Pesach. What do you want me to have? Matzah. That's great. I'm an Avdad Kuchabrichu. When I'm working, I'm an Avdad Kuchabrichu. Why am I going to work? The dames tzura liyetzra, because I want to be like the Hashem Mahu Chanun Afata Chanun. I want to have money to give tzedakah, and then it's 100% part of Avodas Hashem. And as Alter Rebbe, again, this is not me saying it. Alter Rebbe says that this is the Ikar Avodah, even more so than learning Torah, and that's what Alter Rebbe says.
I understand.
And the Alter Rebbe, remember, was a Chiddush Rebbe who was a Goyin Adir and Nigler, what Shulchan Aruch Harav, and Hilchos Talmud Torah, and the Alter Rebbe hear him saying,
I'm not contesting it.
and the Alter Rebbe is saying that in Deiris Harishonim, the Ikar Avodah was Torah, and today the Ikar Avodah is Taka.
Even though it could be is a klola, but how do you? It has like.
If you're not contesting, why do you say even so? You are contesting.
No, I just want to ask.
Yeah, the fact that it's,
I want to understand it.
He's not questioning, but he's
You don't have to understand.
No, that's not true.
let me ask you a
You have to
question.
understand as much as you
You
can.
want to
You have an
know?
obligation to understand.
Bezeyas apecha techalechem, yeah.
You can't.
You're saying it's a klola.
No, that's what they say.
I know, but
let's.
let's look at that for a second. So Hashem created the world, and within 3 hours after He created the world, boom! We were beset with the biggest klolas possible, which are lasting now for 6,000 years. You tell me, is that really a klola, or is that really the intention?
Sounds more like the intention.
We've mentioned before the famous Medrash, the Medrash Tanchuma, that says that when Hashem told Adam Rishon,
Maybe it's not a klola. Maybe it's a bracha.
the whole idea of all of the klolos that were given, are all of them were, it's going to, in order to get a good result, you're going to have to work in every single area. It's the same, everything that was said over there.
Same thing. Yeah.
Also the klolos that were given to Kala, to be tzafin, what's the lashon? The etzev teildir, it's ar gidul banim. So the idea is that nothing in life is easy, and anything which is valuable comes through hard work. The Medrash says, we met in the past, the Medrash says that when Adam Rishon, when Hashem told him, that's it, you're going to die now, because you ate from the Eitzadas, because originally Adam Rishon was supposed to live forever. So it's actually connected to this week's parsha, because Adam Rishon turns to Hashem and says, I have a mashal to tell you. He says there was a man who decided he wants to divorce his wife. So he went to the sefer and he wrote up a get, and he sticks it in his pocket and comes home. And he says to his wife, bring me a cup of water, please. He brings a cup of water, he takes a sip, spits it out, it's lukewarm. Here's your get. So the wife says to the husband, don't hack me a chinik. You're not giving me a get because the water is lukewarm. You had it sitting, you had a sefer and ate them, you had it sitting in your pocket. You're waiting for an excuse. It was part of the plan all along. You're going to divorce me. Adam tells Hashem, you're telling me that because I ate from the Etz Hadas, that's why I'm dying? In the Torah, which is Alpayim Shanan Kadma Torah La'ilam, before the world was created, what do you have over there? Zeis HaTorah Adam Ki Yamos Ba'ayil. Our parsha, this week's parsha. In other words, that concept of Misa always existed, always was there. You found an excuse. It's not. I'm not. The fact that human beings die is not because of it was part of the blueprint
Of the master plan.
Yeah.
Very good.
Good point.
The Eibishter had in mind that the world should run in a certain way. Now, why did it require that the Adam and Chava should mess up in order to get there is a question. It's a good question, but the bottom line is that's the Seder. The Eibishter wants. And if there was no Bezeis HaPecha, there wouldn't be tzedakah. If money was growing on trees, there wouldn't be tzedakah. And Elam Chesed, the end of the day, where we are is where we're supposed to be, and Alter Rebbe is telling us the Ikar Aveda of our day is tzedakah. I want to conclude with connecting this somewhat to our parsha, and also a little to some very special days in the calendar that's coming up next week, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel Tammuz. This idea, we're learning in this Peirik, and then we learned it again, we learned it also in Siman Zayin. The larger understanding, every generation has their job, and every person has their job. And every person is given the tools that are necessary for their job. We see in this week's parsha. In this week's parsha, we have the passing of Aaron HaKohen and the passing of Miriam. Actually, in reverse order. Miriam and Aaron. What happens after Miriam passes away? The Be'er Shel Miriam disappears. What happens after Aaron passes away? The Nani Yaakov disappear. The Gemara tells us, Masechtas Tainis, the Gemara says that the Yidden in the desert, they were accompanied by 3 miracles throughout. Miracle, there was the Man, there was the Be'er Shel Be'er, and there was the Nani Yaakov. And they were b'schus of the 3 tzaddikim. The Man was b'schus of Moshe, and the Nani Yaakov was b'schus Aaron, and the Be'er was Be'er Shel Miriam, b'schus Miriam, and that's why when Miriam passed away, the Be'er left, and that's why when Aaron passed away, the Anonim. But eventually, both the Be'er and the Anonim came back b'schus of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, what is this? What Torah is Melashon Heira. What does this mean to us? What is the lesson over here? And what is it also? Is this random? Moshe, the Man, Aaron, the Anani Yaakov, and Miriam, the Be'er. What's the connection? So the Rebbe explains in the Sikha that the 3 leaders of Klal Yisrael at the time, Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, each one of them had a different function. And the miracle that came about b'schus them was a reflection of that function. Moshe Rabbeinu is known as the Raya Mehemna, the Raya Neman. In fact, Moshe Rabbeinu, he was tested. How did Hashem know that he's going to be a good leader? Because he was a Raya and he was a very conscientious shepherd of the flocks of Yisrael. And what is the idea of a Raya? A Raya feeds the flock. Moshe Rabbeinu, and spiritually, Moshe Rabbeinu fed the Yidden. What did he feed them? He fed them Torah. And Torah is like food. Because just like food, every single person has their own needs and their own diet, and depending on their age and their gender and their size and their different, today especially we're very sensitive, different food sensitivities. Everyone eats differently. Torah also, everyone, you can't teach Torah to all of Klal Yisrael as a whole. Everyone takes it individually. There's first grade, there's second grade, there's third grade. People have different minds. And Moshe Rabbeinu, his idea was feeding everyone Torah. To put it in different words, to be a teacher, you have to look at every one of your students as individually. If you come to a class and you have 20 students and you say, you're all the same, you're not a good teacher. What was Aaron's idea? What was Aaron's inyan? Aaron's inyan was Avos Yisrael, which is the exact opposite. Avos Yisrael means you look at a group of 20 Yidden and you say, you're all the same. You're all Yidden, you're all holy, you're all beautiful. Doesn't make a difference what. You're all, every single one of them, you is Bonim Atem La Hashem Elokeichem. So Moshe and Aaron were actually opposites in that sense. And that's why, b'schus Moshe, we got the man, which is food which everyone eats individually, and also came in differences. Some dochi b'meducha, bishli b'parer, as the Gemara says. But then, and Aaron, because he looked at all Yidden as a single unit, he had the clouds which encompassed all of Klal Yisrael equally. And Miriam, what is the idea of water? Water, Moshe gave the food, Miriam gave the water. What does it mean, food and water? Water is not nourishing. Water is not mason. That's what halacha is, that you can be ma'ariv on everything. You can make an eruv with anything except for water. So what is the function of water? The function of water is that it takes the food and it distributes it to all the different parts of the body. It takes the food and brings it even to every single one of the limbs. And that was Miriam's function. Miriam, as we know already back from time of Mitzrayim, she was the midwife, she dealt with the children, which is the idea of taking the Torah given by Moshe, the food, and distributing it, make sure that every limb, every single Yid, even the little children, everyone gets their portion of Torah. And that's why she was the Be'er Shel Miriam. So we see it isn't random. Every single one, the miracle represented their avodah. When Aaron passed away, his avodah was absent, so the nes was absent. Miriam passed away, her avodah was absent, the nes was absent. So when we say that they came back b'schus Moshe, what does that mean? That means Moshe suddenly, he became not only the one who taught Torah, but he suddenly also became the lover of Klal Yisrael, and he became the one also to take care of the little children. And that's why because the miracles returned because the miracles are a result of that avodah. When Moshe saw that there was a vacuum created by the passing of his two siblings, he jumped in. It's not that he took out a wand and said abracadabra, and suddenly there came the clouds came back, and then boom, 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 another abracadabra, and the water came back. He did the avodah of Aaron, and the clouds came back. He did the avodah of Miriam, and the water came back. Which is a very interesting illustration of this idea, but it also provides a little balance over here. On the one hand, we see how we had three people, Aaron, Moshe, Miriam, and each one of them had their own unique avodah based on their own neshama, which is a lesson to us. I have to know, what is my avodah? Am I a Baal Esek? Is my job to give tzedakah? Or maybe it's my job to teach Tanya classes. I don't know, whatever. What is my job? But there's another powerful lesson, which is, regardless of what your personal avodah and your personal strength is, when you see a vacuum,
jump in.
you have to fill it.
Gotta fill it up.
Got to fill it up. You can't, exactly. You can't say you see someone needs help. It's not my type. No. If you see it and there's a vacuum, there's no one else over there. You're a kohen and they're supposed to be working in the Beis HaMikdash, but if there's a mess mitzvah and there's no one to take care of the mess mitzvah, you have to go and be metapel, even if it means to become tummy. And this connects with this upcoming week. We have the Yom Tov in Chabad of Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tammuz, which is the Chag HaGeula of the Rebbe Rayatz, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, the father-in-law of our Rebbe. He became the Rebbe in Russia in 1920, which was 3 years after the Communist Revolution. The Communist Revolution was in 1917, and at that time, the Rabbanim and the Gdolei Hader who lived in Russia, they ran away. They all left Russia. They were faced by this incredible regime that made it their absolute mission to eradicate and destroy Yiddishkeit and Amun and Hashem, right? And the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't run away. And the Frierdiker Rebbe started off, and he was opened up yeshivas and chadarim and sent out to make mikvahs and sheikhtim. And he was arrested several times, till finally in 1927 he was arrested and he was sentenced to death. And then miraculously, that death sentence was commuted to 10 years of hard labor. Then that was further commuted to 3 years of galus, and then to which he had to go to a city called Kasrama, and he spent over there 9 days, after which he was miraculously freed on Yud Beis Tammuz. Yud Beis Tammuz, which was his birthday, he was given the information that he was freed, and the actual papers were signed the next day on Yud Gimel Tammuz. Now the Frierdiker Rebbe, afterwards, he was forced to leave Russia. He was forced to leave. So he left shortly thereafter, and he ended up, for the next 12 years or so, he was in Latvia and then in Warsaw. And then in 1940 he ended up in America until he passed away in 1950. And it's really a fascinating story, and it really mirrors this idea of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, how you look at the different eras of the Frierdiker Rebbe and you realize how he, regardless of what his personal preferences were, wherever there was a vacuum, he jumped in. Now the Frierdiker Rebbe was a Rebbe, and the traditional task of a Chassidic Rebbe, Lubavitch Rebbe, is to say Chassidus and to nurture his Chassidim. But 1920 comes along, and Chinuch is in trouble, because that was the main gezerah. The main gezerah of the Russians was against Chinuch Altaris HaKodesh, against teaching Torah, and that became his whole thing. His whole thing was, every sikha is about Tashbar, Tanoik Yishal Beis Rabin, Tanoik Yishal Beis Rabin. There's a sikha once, the Frierdiker Rebbe turned to one of his biggest Chassidim. We're talking about someone who was a phenomenal goyin, a nigla in Chassidus and Zetan. He said his name. He says, I want you to know, if you tust in Tashbar, if you're doing Chinuch, then you're mine. And if not, you can be doing whatever, you can be doing the holiest things, but to me you have no connection. You can be davening and learning all day, but if you're not teaching kids Torah, to me you have no connection. Now what's the connection between a Chassidic Rebbe and Torah? Chassidic Rebbe and opening up Chadarim and Yeshivas, that's not the job, that's not the traditional job. That was what needed, and he went and he did it ad kidei mesiras nefesh mamish, literally ad kidei mesiras nefesh. And then he was expelled from Russia. Then he ended up next 10 years in Russia, in Latvia, and mostly in Poland. And there is a avodah that was entirely different based on the needs of there. It was also different than most of his chassidim were left behind in Russia. So there was a different avodah. The avodah was trying to teach chassidus to people in Poland. And then he ends up in America. And when he comes to America, and suddenly he opens up a publishing house and he starts printing Mavila Kriyas. He's starting to print, primers, and he's opening up schools in Buffalo and in Worcester and in Chicago and coming to America and saying America is nicht anders. We've spoken about this many times. How when everyone else was saying Ki chazaku mimenu, that America is stronger than us, Eretz echelas yeshva, like mamish, like what and the Frierdiker Rebbe said, Ali Nala, that said there's nothing. America is nicht anders. This is a place where Torah will thrive and flourish. And now that we're going to reverse the tide. And by the way, here we are, 80 years later, and it's happening by Mitzias. Back then, Reform, conservative, right? These were the most powerful. And today, I don't know if you're following the news, but a few weeks ago there came out a new Pew study of the study of American Jewry, Reform and conservative, and they're all getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And 38% of Yidden in the United States have a connection to Chabad. So what the Frierdiker Rebbe started in Tavshin in 1940, when he was facing insurmountable odds, which no one could believe whatsoever. At that time, Frumkeit, everyone was a one-way road, and Reform and conservative were the thing. And today, it's mamish the other way around. People are coming back, and it's not only Chabad. The Frierdiker Rebbe built ladders, and followed by the Rebbe, which the other people were. And all of this is enabled by the Chag HaGeula that we have, that we're celebrating next week. It basically Gimel Tammuz, but the lesson for every single one of us is this lesson of Mesiras Nefesh, and this lesson which Moshe in this week's parsha, of when you see a vacuum, Kisira arum v'chisisa, you see a Yid who's naked, you go and you have to cover him. And that is, it doesn't make a difference what your particular avodah is, what your preference is. You have to know that the Ikar avodah is tzedakah, the different forms of tzedakah, there's tzedakah begufin, there's tzedakah b'mamin, there's tzedakah b'nefesh. Our avodah is tzedakah, and we look and we find the tzedakah that is necessary of us, and that's the tzedakah that we go and we do. Shabbos, everyone.